Welcome to Girl Choose Yourself, where we're trading self-doubt for self-trust and settling for soaring. I'm your host, Eimear, and together here we're building the confidence to create lives so deliciously bold that they scare us a little. In the best possible way, of course, because life's too damn precious and too short to stay cozy in our comfort zones. It is time to choose ourselves for life so damn fabulous and soulfully fulfilling that we have to keep pinching ourselves to check if we're dreaming. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? When poet Mary Oliver asked this question, she was really getting at the same truth that leaders throughout history have discovered, that there's nothing like the recognition of life's finite nature to bring crystal clear focus to what really matters. And today that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a powerful ancient practice that's as relevant now as it was 2,000 years ago. So picture this, if you will. It's 170 AD. The most powerful man in the world is sitting in his tent on a military campaign. And instead of plotting conquests or counting his riches, he's writing in his personal journal. You could leave right now. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That was Marcus Aurelius, and his private journal, which was never meant for publication, would become one of the most influential books in history. It's called Meditations. And it's a fascinating read. I came across it years ago when I was listening to a podcast, Tim Ferriss podcast. And Tim asked this question at the end of his podcast where he asks his guests to recommend a book or to mention one of the books that they most often give as a gift to somebody else. And Meditations was the book that kept coming up by many of these influential, very successful people that Tim would interview on his podcast. And I heard Meditations so many times that I bought it and read it, and it was just an incredible read. But it's really fascinating to see who keeps coming back to these words from Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. And Bill Clinton, for example, 42nd president of the United States, keeps the book by his bedside and reads it regularly. James Mattis, he's a 4-star Marine Corps general and former Secretary of Defense, carried it into combat. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th president, also read it. John Stuart Mill, one of history's most influential philosophers, studied it deeply. And even when, I can't pronounce his surname, so Jiabao, the former premier of China, apparently had read it over 100 times. 100 times. Why? Well, because in his private reflections, Marcus Aurelius captured something really timeless about getting clear on what really matters in life. I'm studying nearly at the end of my studies to qualify as a mindfulness meditation teacher. And there's something that the Buddhists also have in this regard, looking at the impermanence of life, of how finite life is. And there is a practice called the Five Remembrances that some practitioners do. And it would be, I've done it a couple of times, and I'm thinking of taking it on as something that I would daily, remind myself of. Here are the 5 remembrances. I am of a nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love is of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I am heir to my actions. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So there's so many practices, so many traditions where we're kind of looking at this sort of life is short and finite, and what are you going to do about that? How are you going to grasp it? What are you going to do with this one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says? And when you think of more modern times, there was a very famous speech that Steve Jobs gave back in 2005, I think it was. And he was sick at the time. And he was at Stanford. And he said something very, very similar to what Marcus Aurelius was saying to us. And he said this: remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. So there's a practice, and it's called Memento Mori, and that means remember you must die. And the practice isn't about death. It isn't a morbid practice. It really is about living with absolute clarity and really embracing just how precious life is, because I think it's really easy to be so distracted in our day to day that we just forget and we don't live with purpose because we're not really connected. We're not really remembering that we don't know how long we have. And there is an urgency once you connect to the truth of life and how finite it is. And that's a beautiful thing. And it can encourage us to really engage more deliberately and purposefully in our lives. Maya Angelou said it like this. She reminded us that life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. When was the last time a moment took your breath away? When was the last time you felt awe or wonder or bliss or joy? When was the last time a moment took your breath away? I think in our modern world, we're kind of drowning so much in distractions and options and expectations. We have social media bombarding us with countless versions or visions of success. And we're so busy responding to the urgency of life that we forget to choose what's really important for us in our lives. The noise of should has gotten louder and louder and is sort of drowning out our inner wisdom. So the question isn't just how long we're going to live, because none of us knows that. We just don't know. But how deeply we can choose, how deeply and authentically we're going to live each moment that we are given. And that's why I want to introduce you to this ancient practice. And it's rooted in that ancient wisdom of meditations. And I call it Memento Mori. And the phrase Memento Mori comes from ancient Greek philosophers and the Bible, and it's a Latin phrase, and it means that, remember that you will die. Just remembering that we're human, that we're mortal. So this is how you do the practice. I'm going to outline it briefly, and you can find more details in my book in chapter 2. But I'll give you enough so that you can do it. So it starts with really, if at this moment right now, your life ended. That's it. Right now, just look at your watch, the date, whenever you're listening to this, it's stopped and it's finished. And then I want you to imagine that you are a presence at your funeral or your memorial service a few days after your passing. And you think about who would eulogize you. And you write your obituary. Write the eulogy. Write what you think would be said about you, about the life that you've lived up until this point. And that's sort of part one of a Memento Mori. And that can be a little bit unsettling when you do it, because often you find that you're not really living deeply into a sense of meaning and purpose. And that if your life was snatched away right now, today, that you might have many regrets. And when I've done this with people, this is the really difficult part, because people feel, oh, well, wait a minute, I was going to do this other thing, or I've lost contact with that person, or I've become so disconnected from people generally that I don't even know who would be at my service. I mean, it can be very unsettling. And that really is a powerful jolt and a reminder that we're so easily distracted, consuming media, consuming stuff, buying things, that we're not living purposefully, or we think we'll get to that later, some other time. And so this exercise is really, it really is reflecting what Marcus Aurelius said in Meditations, like you could leave life right now. So that's part one of the exercise, where you leave life right now. So you do that part, and then kind of take a breath, have a review. And what happens then when you look at that first obituary or eulogy that you write, you kind of see all the gaps, all the parts of you that aren't expressed, all of those creative impulses that have been left, latent, not expressed, and it doesn't feel good. And so it really helps to uncover what it is that you truly would like to do with this one wild and precious life of yours, when you imagine that, you leave life right now, that it gets cut short in this moment. The next part of the exercise, which is part two, which is done maybe about a week, typically, I say, after part one, is where you think, okay, you get really serious about life and it being meaningful and not putting off what matters. And it's really, you ask yourself this question, and I'm just going to read from the book. If my life could be about anything, if it were just between me and my heart, if no one would ever judge me, laugh at me, or tell me it's impossible, if I were bold and brave about my innermost dreams, what then would I want to be about in my one wild and precious life? And to be that so powerfully that it was undeniably obvious to those around me. So you kind of imagine that from this moment forward, that you live your life really connected to and aligned with what feels most vital and important to you. And so every goal mightn't magically be realized, right? But the direction that you're taking in your life would be evident, it would be clear. And now that you have that in mind, then you return to your funeral, or you return to your memorial service, and you imagine what that would be like if you live life in that way and you live a full, long life. And then the second part of the exercise is when you really visualize that life and bring yourself to the end of it. And then you write what you might do, experience, achieve, what relationships you might have formed, where you might be living, what projects you had taken on, what contributions you had made to your community or society at large. And you really are profoundly choosing yourself. And so that's the exercise that's based in this kind of ancient wisdom. And I think one of the things that is commonly revealed when people do that is, well, first of all, these kind of universal truths of what matters most. The people that you want to spend more time with, how you want to feel. You get surprisingly clear quickly on what matters most. So if you're somebody who procrastinates and second guesses, and I'm not so sure, maybe it's this, maybe I should do this, do the Memento Mori exercise. Things get very clear very quickly. Because you see this gap between the path you're on now and the legacy that you're going to leave. If you were to leave us now, you've created that legacy right up to now. And how would that feel? You see the gap. There's just another example of this, which is a slightly different take on it, which I came across in some reading the other day, and it was about the founder of Panera, and his name is, or the Panera co-founder, and his name is Ron, I'm going to pronounce his surname wrong, Shaikh, Shaikh. Don't know how to pronounce that, Shaikh. Okay, I'm going with Shaikh. And he made a few bucks, 7.5 billion, and he credits his success to this very simple practice of writing his obituary annually. So same thing. And he calls this a pre-mortem. So between Christmas and his birthday, which happens to be the end of December 30th, he would dedicate a day or two to visualizing himself at the end of his life. And then he would write an obituary, or he would write a journal entry or a news story from that hypothetical future. And then he would sort of trace that back to his current time and say, okay, what projects do I need to take on to get myself closer to that direction, to that end game, basically. So it's a really, really powerful practice, because often when we're saying, choose yourself, the big question comes, choose myself for what exactly? Because it can feel very, it can feel a little bit unsettling to not know what you want. And I definitely have not known what I have wanted. And we're not often very clear on it, because we get into the habit of our lives and a certain cadence that our life is taking. And it can be difficult to really pinpoint what it is that we really want. And there's so many distractions that we can end up sort of comparing ourselves to others and thinking, oh, maybe I should do that because they're doing that. Or we sort of adopt other people's definitions of success and they don't really resonate deeply for us. So when you do the Memento Mori exercise, you get a lot of clarity very, very quickly. I'm looking at my notice board here opposite where my desk is, and on it I have a picture of myself from when I was in kindergarten, maybe 6, and then I have a picture of my grandmother in her 80s sitting in a chair reading some letter, and I have them there to remind myself that those are the two ages that I want to make young girl Eimear proud. And I want to, when I'm my grandmother's age and I'm sitting in my chair and reading my books, and at that stage of my life, I don't want to have any regrets, or I want to minimize them. And I think it's really powerful to take yourself to that place of the end game and start thinking, okay, what do I want that to be like? Lots of people don't want to think about the end of their lives. And I think it's quite a very, very powerful exercise to do that. So in the chapter 2 of my book, Choose Yourself, there's a chapter called The Lost Self, where I dive deeper into this practice and how it connects to, rediscovering your authentic desires. And the full Memento Mori exercise is explained in there in detail. So this week, I'm going to invite you to do this practice. I've shared enough in this podcast for you to be able to do it. You're basically taking yourself to your funeral twice, but it's a really positive exercise. I've done so many different exercises, and this is one that I come back to again and again. Feel your mortality, and really feel into it in a really positive, fulfilling way. I think it's life-changing. I think the co-founder of Panera credits this type of practice, his success on this type of practice, and that's $7.5 billion. And that's just money success. That's his definition of success, and we all have our own definitions of success, but we really get very clear on how we want to show up in our lives when we think about an exercise like this. So I invite you to try this practice that we explored today and notice what surfaces for you. What's one thing that becomes clear? What's one change that it might inspire? And if you feel like sharing your insights, maybe use the hashtag #UnlockingTheEndGame and share those on Instagram. I'd love to see that. From Marcus Aurelius to Mary Oliver, from Steve Jobs to Maya Angelou, wisdom across the ages points to this one truth, that life is precious and it's meant to be lived with purpose. It's your one wild and precious life, and it's waiting for you to claim it. Will you? Thank you so much for choosing to spend this time with me today. If you enjoy the episode and it resonated with you, please consider subscribing and share this podcast with someone you know who would benefit from the message. If you'd like to take things a step further, you'll find some free and paid resources in the show notes. And until next time, in the unlikely event that no one has told you this yet today, let me have the profound honor of reminding you that you are truly magnificent, and the world is a far better and brighter place because you are here with us all. See you next time.